He stands in front of a classroom full of boys who hate him. They mock his accent. They test his authority. One of them throws a paper dart straight at his face. And instead of collapsing into humiliation or exploding into rage, he tightens himself like wire and keeps teaching. That's the emotional climate of this novel. Not passion spilling over. Pressure contained. Most people come to the Brontes for storms, for moors, for people tearing themselves apart in the name of love. But this book is different. Quietly different. Its narrator watches himself constantly, measures every gesture, polices every feeling. Even his fantasies arrive wearing a necktie. And that's what makes it strange. Because underneath the disciplined surface of the professor, there's one of the loneliest protagonists in Victorian fiction. This was Charlotte Bronte's first novel. Publishers rejected it repeatedly. It only appeared after her death. And once you read it, you understand why. The professor doesn't give readers the wild emotional release of Jane Eyre. It gives them something colder, tighter, and maybe more revealing. What makes The Professor fascinating is not that it's unfinished or overlooked. It's that it feels like Charlotte Brontë trying to write against her own instincts. The novel follows William Crimsworth, a young Englishman who leaves an oppressive life in Britain and becomes a teacher in Brussels. That setup comes directly from Bronte's own experience studying and teaching in Belgium. But instead of filtering the story through a heroine like Jane Eyre or Lucy Snow, she chooses a male narrator. And he is weirdly defensive from the first page. William insists he is rational, controlled, independent. He constantly distances himself from sentimentality. He judges emotional excess in other people. He especially judges women for it. The whole novel reads like a man trying very hard not to admit what he needs. That's the angle here. Not Charlotte Bronte's forgotten first novel. Plenty of videos can tell you that. What matters is that The Professor is a book about emotional self-surveillance. About a man so determined to protect his dignity that he nearly amputates his own inner life. And because of that, the novel accidentally says something brutal about loneliness. William Crimsworth begins life in a familiar Brontë position, trapped among people who despise him. After his parents die, he's sent to live with wealthy relatives who treat him like an inconvenience. His older brother Edward is especially cruel. Edward owns a mill. William works there briefly. The atmosphere feels industrial and suffocating. Smoke, noise, humiliation. The important detail is this: William refuses dependence. Constantly. Even when it hurts him. So he leaves England and takes a teaching job in Brussels at a boys' boarding school run by Monsieur Paulette. The city unsettles him immediately. He watches everyone carefully. He distrusts charm. He studies social interactions like military maneuvers. Then comes the classroom. And Brontë is very good here. The boys are vicious. Not melodramatically vicious. Realistically vicious. They test him in small, humiliating ways. They laugh at him. Ignore him. Push boundaries inch by inch. William survives by becoming harder than they are. He learns to dominate through sheer self-control. But the emotional center of the novel arrives when he begins teaching at a girls' school run by Mademoiselle Reuter. And Mademoiselle Reuter is one of the most interesting manipulative figures Brontë ever wrote. She appears warm, intelligent, composed. William slowly becomes attracted to her. Not passionately. That would require vulnerability. Instead, he admires her efficiency, her elegance, her apparent understanding of him. Then the novel pivots. William discovers that Reuter has been quietly studying him the entire time, managing him, encouraging his feelings when useful, withholding affection when convenient. She treats emotional intimacy like administration. He feels betrayed less because he loved her than because he misread the situation. His pride takes the real wound. Around this point, Frances Henry enters the story. She's a young Anglo-Swiss woman who works at the school as a lace mender and part-time teacher. Frances is poor, serious, intelligent, and intensely self-disciplined, which means William likes her almost immediately. Not because she softens him, because she mirrors him. Their romance barely resembles the explosive relationships people expect from the Brontes. There are no Gothic declarations, no spiritual ecstasy. Instead, they conduct careful conversations about work, education, money, and self-respect. And honestly, it can feel almost awkward. William wants love, but only under conditions that preserve his authority. Frances wants independence, but also devotion. Their relationship becomes a negotiation between affection and control. Meanwhile, Reuter keeps interfering. She manipulates social situations, spreads implications, watches people like a chess player. Eventually, William sees the whole structure clearly and leaves the school. He and Frances marry. They open a boarding school together. They become financially stable. The ending is surprisingly calm. No tragedy, no great sacrifice, just work, marriage, and gradual success. Which sounds emotionally flat when summarized like that. But the strange thing is that the emotional tension never fully disappears. Even at the end, William narrates like a man monitoring himself from outside his own body. I think the professor is really about shame disguised as self-discipline. William Crimsworth tells us constantly that he values independence. But the novel keeps showing us something more specific. He is terrified of exposure, of needing people openly, of losing status emotionally. Look at how he describes attraction. Even desire arrives filtered through judgment. He admires Frances because she is restrained, industrious, economical. He distrusts emotional openness almost everywhere in the novel. And that changes how the book reads. A lot of Victorian protagonists repress emotion because society demands it. William represses emotion because he thinks emotional dependence is degrading. That's different. The result is a narrator who treats intimacy like a threat to personal sovereignty. Even the Brussels setting matters here. The city feels crowded with observation. Windows, corridors, schools, surveillance. William is always watching and being watched. He evaluates himself relentlessly. Other people become mirrors reflecting his status back at him. That's why the Reuter plot hits him so hard. She outobserves him. She understands that his weak point is vanity disguised as rationality. And Brontë absolutely knows this. One of the cleverest things about the novel is that it quietly undermines William's self-image. He thinks he's objective, but he's deeply reactive. He thinks he's emotionally controlled, but entire sections pulse with wounded pride. He thinks he sees through illusion. Yet he repeatedly mistakes emotional management for genuine connection. This is probably why the novel confused early readers. People wanted the emotional intensity of Jane Eyre. Instead, they got a narrator who spends much of the book suppressing intensity before it can fully form. The emotional drama happens in contractions, tiny humiliations, defensive thoughts, power struggles inside conversations. But that restraint is exactly what makes the book modern. Because William feels less like a romantic hero than a psychologically anxious professional. He manages himself the way modern people manage their LinkedIn identities. Every interaction becomes strategic. Every vulnerability feels risky. And the ending matters because of that. A lot of readers call the conclusion conventional. Marriage, stability, respectable work. But emotionally, it's more complicated. William never transforms into an emotionally open person. He simply finds a structure where his guardedness can coexist with intimacy. That's not triumph. It's compromise. And honestly, it feels true. There's another layer too. The gender experiment. Charlotte Brontë writing as a man produces something unexpectedly revealing. William's masculinity is performative almost from page 1. He constantly asserts authority because he fears humiliation. His emotional reserve is not natural confidence. It's armor. In some ways, the novel reads like Brontë dissecting the emotional costs of Victorian masculinity from the inside. Not the dramatic masculine suffering of Heathcliff. Something quieter, more socially recognizable. A man trained to believe dignity matters more than emotional honesty. And that makes the book oddly painful. Because William gets many of the things he wants. Career, marriage, respectability. Yet the narration still feels lonely. Like someone speaking through a locked door. What the professor understands about modern life is the exhaustion of constant self-management. A lot of people now live exactly the way William Crimsworth does. They curate themselves professionally. They hide vulnerability behind competence. They treat emotional exposure like reputational risk. You can hear it in corporate language constantly. Maintain professionalism. Project confidence. Don't overshare. William would understand all of it instantly. The book also understands something uncomfortable about loneliness. Not all lonely people are visibly isolated. Some are highly functional, polite, successful, disciplined. They've simply turned self-protection into a permanent habit. And eventually the habit becomes identity. That's why the professor lingers more than you expect. Not because it delivers overwhelming emotion, but because it shows what happens when someone learns to contain emotion too well. Most Brontë novels burn outward. The Professor burns inward. It's the sound of a person trying to keep control so completely that even his happiness arrives carefully measured. And by the final page, the saddest thing about William Crimsworth is not that he suffered. It's that he survived by becoming unreadable.